Since the release of Nightreign's DLC, we have been playing it non-stop, checking out all the brand new characters, maps, and features available in this DLC, and since we've learned a whole bunch about it, I figured I'd make this video going over 10 top tips that will help you be successful in each one of your runs. To kick things off, I do want to talk about the brand new map, the Hollows, which is a shifting earth event, which when you apply that shifting earth event to your expeditions, you will actually be brought to this brand new map. It looks incredible, the soundtrack is also amazing, but as you're wandering around and experiencing this for the first time, you might wander into these 2 points of interest, which actually curse you with the crystal curse, which halves your HP. Just being in the near vicinity of like these castles or these structures will apply that curse, so you can either decide to 1, go in with that curse and try and take down all of the enemies inside, which of course is going to be a little bit harder, but if you actually venture around the map and find 4 of these other mini crystals, which are blue, and after beating the day 1 boss will actually appear on your map in day 2, you will then break the giant crystal in the middle of the map, which has the bonus passive effect of nullifying that crystal curse, meaning you can go into those bigger structures with all of the major loot inside without being cursed at all. And also, just as a little bit of extra information, that crystal in the middle becomes a spirit spring. Make sure you use that on the way out to quickly get to wherever you want to go, and talking of places to go, that actually moves us on to the next point. In this new map, again, there's a bunch of other things to find. The mines are on the very outskirts of the map, near where those cursed castles are, and inside the mines you can either find a stone troll or a crystallian, and again, upon defeating one of these enemies, you will then get the choice of either picking up another weapon or the smithing stone too. There's also a weapon duplication area in this map, which actually leads down to the catacombs. Just look out for these kind of like stairways leading down into said catacomb, and after beating the mini boss there, you are then free to use like the DLC remembrance duplicating altar, which will obviously this time duplicate your weapons, like how you can do in Nocleteo. I also just want to let you know that the middle of the map is a good spot for bosses. I'm going to kind of like show you a graphic now as like a cone as to where a lot of them are, because as much as there's a lot of enemies in those castle areas and there's a lot of tiers to this map, this sort of like congregation in the middle also synergizes quite well with a lot of churches. So in your beginning runs or your first attempts, I suggest kind of staying in the middle area where I have highlighted, trying to take out some of the mini bosses before venturing off, because the circle can be quite brutal. Oh, and talking about the circle, on your day 2 boss, you will always finish in this Colosseum, so just know in advance, when you go to fight your night 2 boss, you will always be asked to go here. Now, I'm just going to let you know for a spoiler alert warning for the first major boss in the DLC, so if you don't want to know anything about that, like kind of skip ahead now. But the first major boss is one called the Balancers, which is a little bit tricky solo because it does involve multiple enemies once again. Yes, the gank squads are back, but this time around, they have actually stolen a few moves from people like Mesmer and also Rolana, whilst also dropping Nuke's and Holster's major move on you too. But if you are struggling with this boss co-op or solo, the best thing to try and do is take away the original Balancers and lure them out one by one. It is a bit finicky to do this. The reason why it's finicky is because they do actually teleport as like a dodge for certain moves, so they might teleport behind you, obviously leaving you vulnerable both in the front and back. But then in phase 2 and also phase 3, you will have one of these guards becoming like an ultra form of them, being the ringleader, ordering them around for special moves like that holster move I just mentioned a moment ago. So if you are struggling just taking on that major boss with everybody still alive, try whittling down the non-major versions, because if you kill them, they are dead until you take down the major one in pink. So you can whittle down the amount of enemies you have to deal with, but of course at the beginning it is a little bit tricky, so maybe try and use like an ult on one of them just to get rid of one, and like I say, try and like lure some of them away, because if you do actually just run away sometimes, like in the footage I'm showing now, you can kind of get out of the aggro range, or at least the major one leaves you alone for a little bit, so you can just focus on those miniature ones. But if for whatever reason that is still being impossible for you, if you manage to get yourself any sleep pots, sleep grease, or just a sleep inflicting weapon, these guys can also fall to sleep. So if you do just want to deal with the major one and put the other ones to sleep, that is also a very viable option. And just whilst we're talking about bosses, I know a lot of people are struggling with another certain boss, and no, I'm not talking about Artorias. I've got a bunch of comments asking me how to deal with Mogh. Yes, Mogh is back, and he can be a little bit tough because now that he is in the Nightreign DLC, he has also gained a secondary use of his Nihil ability when you do transition into his phase 2, where spears will appear around the arena. You can actually destroy these spears, and much like how Mogh's spear itself has an area effect when we use it, these spears also have a fairly limited radius. So by taking out say 1 or 2 next to each other, when this secondary Nihil procs, you do have a safe area where you're not going to get killed by that move, which can be obviously super handy, especially if you do have to go into phase 2, as you will have to trade a lot of heals. But again, if you're lucky enough to get the Libra merchant event in your game, so where Libra's merchant is just out there in the world, there is a chance for him to give you a purifying crystal tier, which obviously, like the base game, if you use it in the boss arena, you will take very little damage whilst he's doing his nihils. And just swiftly moving on to the next tip is actually going to be based around the 2 new characters, or at least I'll do 1 tip for each one. The first one I want to show you is actually to do with Scholar, because I'm sure you guys already know his abilities, like his skill power and his ultimate, are really good at helping the team, both buffing himself and also allies, whilst also debuffing enemies. But what you probably didn't know, or maybe haven't had a look at yet, is his passive abilities with consumables. Every time you use a certain type of consumable with Scholar, you will then be making progress to the next rank with that particular consumable, which each rank up to rank 3 gives an additional benefit. So for examples, with things like kukris and throwing knives, after using a handful of those and getting it to rank 3, not only will you be able to damage enemies still with the kukris, but you'll also be reducing their defense. This can obviously be super handy, especially if you've got like fan daggers or throwing knives on you, to just throw 1 or 2 every now and again, because the debuff does last quite a long time, as you can see. But kukri is just one type of consumable you can do this with. There's actually a whole bunch, including pots, which if you've got a bunch of bleed pots or any kind of status pots, when you get to rank 3 you will have them lingering for longer and actually have a pull of that particular effect on the floor, also doing additional procs. But even more attacking pots like lightning pots will then do an additional hit. Gravity stones will actually activate up to 3 times. Turtlenecks will give you extended amount of endurance as well as the stamina regen. You'll get 2 stacks of damage buff with exalted fleshes, and then the boiled crabs will also increase your maximum HP along with that defensive buff too. Feel free to play around with all of this. Like I say, I haven't done absolutely every single one, but just know that is probably very, very crucial, even if you just use the items as you're going out your expeditions, to rank up Scholar's passive ability. And then another thing you may not know about Undertaker is you can actually be invincible for a select amount of time. Again, her skill allows you to have additional poise, additional defense, and additional attack, which does raise again if you keep hitting your enemies whilst that skill is active. And of course, the ultimate is a fantastic plunging, piercing move, which can be used for free after a perfect dodge from a grab, or another teammate using their ult and use that as a punishing move again for free. But if you didn't know this, if you've got your skill fully charged and also your ultimate fully charged at the same time, if you then hold Y and then press LT and RT, so activating both the skill and the ultimate at the same time, you'll then have a brief period where you will always dodge damage, very similar to that of the effect of Wilder's passive. You'll be able to see your gauges obviously whittled down, and that is obviously the time that you have in this mode, which will prevent you from taking any damage. Just the only downside is if you are trying to say poise through an attack with this, you're not going to be able to do that because it will just break you out of your attack and make you dodge, so just bear that in mind. So this can obviously be super useful for certain boss fights, especially if you suck at dodging certain ultimate moves like me. There have also been a host of new passives added to weapons as well, so we do actually have things like rolling attacks and also specific wording for melee attacks too, so not just physical damage but melee attacks only. So we've essentially had the lacerating tree talisman added to the game, which the rolling ones do affect backsteps as well. So if you are using, say, a spear or something that has a unique attack after backstepping or rolling, this can be incredibly useful for you, and the damage increase is actually quite significant with that, or at least the percentage is quite high normally. But we've also had a lot of changes to previous passive effects as well. I'm just going to throw up the screenshot from the patch notes that Bandai Namco have released. So there's a lot of increases to a lot of effects like jumping attacks, skill attack power, and of course just in general like two-handing or holding two weapons. So not only is there more passives, but the previous passives are now a lot better, so trying to get weapons with these passives is more important than ever. But the passives aren't the only thing that have also changed. In fact, Limvel has also changed, because whenever you do fight anybody whilst the DLC is installed and you do load into Limvel, there is a chance you will see brand new points of interest. These will either be little villages you can go through or swamped castles, kind of reminiscent of the Shaded Castle, but these swamps could be anything from bleed, poison, rot, or even madness, and the idea is to go underground, so through the swamp into the building, into the basement, to then defeat whatever enemies are there. Upon defeating the enemies, you can then go out the back and up the stairs, which will then take you to the top of the tower and around the outer walls, where you will then be able to find some more enemies and also some extra chests. So again, if you're looking for more passives or other weapons or key items, these are some really good locations to do that. But as for the villages, they actually have the Forges altars from the DLC, so like the Sky Forges, and if you find an unlit bonfire, that will then unlock that forge, which is located like a little bit further up or in the middle, and by using this you can then change the skill power or the Ash of War on a weapon in your inventory to try and re-roll for something else. Again, it's completely random and you can only do one per forge, so if you do have like a really good weapon, let's just say the Flamberge, and it's got like the red main Ash of War on it, and you know you're coming up against Mogh, you can then hopefully change that to something away from fire damage, which I'll say is bad against Mogh, to then make the Flamberge a little bit more usable, or at least have a skill that's a little bit more usable. Then for our next tip, no matter what map you're playing on, whether it be the new Hollow map or Limvel again, there'll be a chance that you'll be invaded by either Tricephalos or Caligo. If you actually beat the balancers and go and try and take on the Dreg Lord, which is the final boss in the DLC, and do that expedition, there's actually a chance for the balancers to also spawn in and invade you. But Tricephalos is an invasion which is really annoying in my opinion. Essentially, the three dogs are split up across the map, which yes, they are a little bit easier to kill, but after you defeat the first one, a bunch of miniature wolves or fire wolves will spawn in and follow you until either one, you get the other two Tricephalos enemies, or you fail the challenge completely, which that will fail when the first circle closes in day 2. The miniature fire dogs hit like an absolute truck, or at least seem to whenever I seem to fight them, and obviously Tricephalos likes to jump around a bit, so as much as people have advised me in my live streams to maybe split up and go and take them on one by one, it can be a little bit dangerous, especially if you're in trios, because again, Tricephalos is going to hit a lot harder and you're going to be on your own having to deal with a lot of stuff and get ganked. So what I would say is try and use your ultimates on the Tricephalos if you can. Stick together and just book it to each location. It is going to get in the way of whatever you're doing, because sometimes they will spawn like in completely different sectors to where you are, and also depending on where they spawn, they could potentially be out of the circle, meaning you have to prioritize the one that's furthest away first to make sure you can take on the other two before the circle closes. And the one thing I haven't mentioned as well, whilst all this is happening, you're getting damage over time. So just bear that in mind for Tricephalos invasion. Go and defeat them as early and as quickly as possible together, because when you do beat them, you'll get their buff, which with successive attacks gives you stamina back and also additional stamina regen. Caligo is simply a hide and seek where you need to go find her in the sort of like red area that she gives. Just be careful, because there will be like a rain of icicles like the entire time, which will do damage to you, but all you need to do is like tap her and then you'll get her ability, which essentially saves you from a killing blow, turning you invisible, kind of like her relic, allowing you to either heal or do whatever you need to do as sort of like a saving grace, which from what I know can be activated once per major fight. Now forgive me, I don't actually have any footage, nor have I experienced the Balancer's invasion. I just know that my good friend Ocelot had that happen in one of his games, but I don't know what the buff is that they give. Feel free to let me know in the comments what it is, and I can either pin or make sure that people are aware of that comment. But all I do know is that the balancers make the enemies in the near vicinity sort of like a red hue, kind of like Deep of Night, where again I believe they become a little bit more tankier and do a little bit more damage. So just be on the lookout for that, and like I say, let me know what the buff is in the comments down below if you've had it. But then for our final top tip of today's video, it is going to be spoiling the last boss, the Dreg Lord. So again, if you don't want to know any details about that, feel free to click off the video, but I hope you've enjoyed in the meantime, and be sure to leave a like, rating and subscribe if you have for more Nightreign tips like this. But the Dreg Lord, when you do look at his expedition in the menus, it will tell you there is no obvious defect, or at least no obvious advantage to bring into the fight. All I will say is that he can be frosted, poisoned and scarlet rotted. I did not seem to be able to get a bleed on him, but I don't know whether that's because I was using characters with lesser arcane and weren't able to do it. But he is also susceptible to quite a bit of stance damage. That's kind of like the thing I would say to bring in. Make sure you've got your ultimates ready, make sure you're using them as much as you can, and just be vigilant in the fight. He actually has an okay moveset. I believe it's similar to Gale. Again, forgive me, I haven't played the Dark Souls 3 DLC, I know, right, criminal, but I'm being told it's a very similar moveset to Gale, which is quite telepathic. It is quite fast, some of his moves, they do come out quite quick, so just be careful with that. And when you get him down to about half health, he will then phase transition, turning basically into a rot version of Putrescent Knight, which this whole area will explode at the end of this move. So basically run away from him if he's ever transitioning like this. But then you also need to worry about added enemies like giant worm faces and other sort of like rot bodies that you can find throughout the game, and depending on whether or not you keep them alive, there will be some times where he actually absorbs these enemies to then give himself an attack buff. You can keep an eye on his health bar, because just below that you will see any negative or positive buffs that he has, and this can exceed upwards to a 10 times buff, which basically will make sure that he one-shots you unless you've got a bunch of negating damage buffs yourself. Also, this footage is me running back a solo victory with Raider, because unfortunately I was not recording on my first victory, but you can still tank a lot of the hits as you're seeing, cause a lot of stance breaks which he's susceptible to, especially in solo, and also just naturally as you're attacking him, he will have like a part of his outer shell broken, which will then also lead to a debuff in defense as well to him. So it is very much kind of like stay on top of him and be rewarded for being punishing. But when you finish phase 1 and all of his health bar the first time round, yes, he does have a second phase with a whole new health bar. This second phase is basically more of the same with a few extra faster moves. Again, most of them can be telegraphed, but if you've got a bunch of ultimates, or especially Raider's Punch or anything like that, you can basically interrupt him a whole bunch, do the same tech of trying to break his stance as much as possible, get those crits in, and like I mentioned before, he does also rot, poison, and can be frosted, so if you are struggling and you want to give yourself an extra edge, bring in those status effects and you should be fine. But again, if you're in solo, Wending Graces will be your friend like they were for me. And again, if any of you have found any busted metas other than the usual Raider meta for this guy, definitely let us know in the comments below. I know I'm making this video a little bit early because the DLC has only been out for like what, almost 48 hours now, but from that first 48 hour or so period, that is what I have learnt. Hopefully this knowledge does pass on to you guys and can help you out in your expeditions, and hopefully make the DLC a little bit easier, because I must say it is a little bit tough. So honestly, don't get discouraged if you are finding it a little bit difficult. It is a little bit difficult, and just keep trying, because these boss fights, even just for the spectacle alone, like the visuals, is worth at least attempting once or twice. So definitely have fun with the DLC. Let me know if you are enjoying it in the comments down below, because I'm always intrigued to hear what you guys have to say. Is this DLC everything you expected? Is it more than you expected? Or are you a little bit disappointed by it? Like I say, get in the comments down below. But honestly, that's everything I need to say for this video. Go have fun, like I say, with the DLC. Let me know how you get on, and I guess I'll catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.